Though the destination of the house flipping process seems quite inviting and tempting, so that everybody would want to even just on consideration embark on the journey, you get into the process and the swing of things and it becomes a quite arduous and stressful process, or at least it has the capability of doing that. Maybe not always, but I speak from a familiarity, not on personal experience, but stories I'm aware of, whether they be just in general circulation or people that I know. The house flipping process takes a lot of effort. So any sort of unnecessary strain perhaps is not the most welcome. And I would imagine for these 6 friends who embark on the process and then come face to face with an unwanted stranger, they're not going to be too happy. But for our entertainment, of course, I'm sure we'll enjoy this. This is going to be a new horror film coming out. I believe it's tagged as of this year, even though IMDb states apparently, I guess it was a 2022 release, or at least that's when it maybe started development. I'm not exactly sure again on the date. I'm pretty sure it isn't officially released yet. I can't find any sort of connection points on that note other than a main trailer, which we're going to engage with in a second. But I mean, I'm open to it. Let's see the quality of this movie, though. I mean, it's a smaller project, to be fair, and some of you know, and especially in the realm of cinema, I do like to give an open field of vision to both commercial releases and smaller fare. Because, while there's plenty of engaging major studio, debuts, I do like to see what's available in the smaller market on part of emerging filmmakers, and to just gauge what art is out there, because sometimes you might find a project that's maybe lesser known in prominence, and is quite competent. We'll see on CHATTERBOX. I'm not necessarily sure yet, because even with the indie scene, there's quite a mixture in quality, and it's usually based perhaps on execution, to be fair, limitation of resources or access to resources, whereas maybe other studios like Disney or Warner Brothers, they got so much money to throw around. Not every independent filmmaker has those provisions that are the easiest to access. But some filmmakers manage those quite well. But when it comes to ITN movies / distribution, because they go by both names, or at least they have in the past, it's ITN movies presently, it's harder to gauge with them, because I've seen works that go either path. And usually among the international releases, they tend to be better realized, especially maybe more VFX-heavy films. That's been a consistent thing with them. But, well, even some of the films have been freer of that. Most of the domestic projects I've seen, though, at least the ones that are filmed in America, at least from what I'm understanding, maybe on projects on record in my mind, they're not always the best works, admittedly. Again, I'm trying to be fair, but at the same time you watch the works and you're like, well, maybe you could have done better here or there. You see potential, you see a lot of room for growth, let's say. We'll see what route CHATTERBOX goes down, but at the very least I will even just be open on it. Because I think the pitch, it's inviting, and I am admittedly much more a horror guy, or thriller guy, but I like the general atmosphere of a horror film, even though maybe I have some content thresholds in mind of what I like to engage with personally. Everybody does. Let's take a look at the project. Maybe I'm sure some of you might not know the name CHATTERBOX, although there's been plenty of films that have adopted this name as well. This is the newest iteration, I guess, along this individualized story. You'll probably appreciate the background if you're not familiar. This is what IMDb has to provide on information. 6 friends chip in to buy a repossessed house to do it up and sell it, only to find it has an unwanted guest that will not leave. I've seen films that kind of float along those lines, too, of the, people who are like, we don't want to leave the house, and they just stay. You're like, I can't get rid of you. Like family. It's like, you've stayed here way too long, and I don't think this is going to be family. Maybe it could be. Maybe that could be the twist of like, oh, it's so-and-so's grandpa or father that doesn't want to leave the house. I mean, that could be a horror experience in itself in terms of the stress that these characters would feel. Let's see which route it goes down, though, in regards to quality. I think it's a good pitch. Let's see how the film delivers. I'm open, though, to it. I generally like anything that's reminiscent of a home invasion type story, or just something unnerving set in maybe a confined setting. We'll see how well the film displays this for ourselves, perhaps together for the first time.
Well, it looks a lot better in the photos. It did.
This isn't bad, considering.
To a lot of hard work.
So is he in the house the entire time? Like, we didn't know it.
Have any of you seen these 2 men recently?
Like, we didn't know what we were buying. Okay, oh my gosh. That's, I was at first like, I don't know how that mask is, pulling itself off for me, but the moving jaw, that worked. You know? I find it tempting. It very much is a smaller budget picture. The way it's filmed, there's a lot of static shots, and they're placed quite well, in my opinion. But some, like, you look at particular traits. I'm not trying to anyway speak in criticism of being like, oh, this film looks bad. I'm just saying there are clear traits when you're as familiarized with the indie space as I am, especially among lower budget projects. Mounted shots, they don't necessarily perhaps have a fluidity to them. Were there any shots that were more free-flowing? Not as much, unless maybe, but even in the cars, I'm sure it was particularly placed. At least it felt that way. There aren't many shots that seem to flow. Some maybe, it's subtle. Most of the shots, though, are static. And the lighting, perhaps there's a utilization of house lighting that I think works, or outdoor lighting. There's good management here, I think, in regards to some of the visual capabilities of the project that bring me in. It does not feel to me like the usual ITN project where I look at it and I'm like, well, maybe, because again, let's say it's not, speaking of this particular project, it doesn't seem very VFX heavy. Some of their other works, though, you look at the VFX and you're like, wow, that looks kind of bad. Admittedly, like, you are obviously limited on what you could spend and maybe how much time you had to realize said images. This is not reliant on VFX. I believe it's practical entirely. At least I would imagine. There's a lot of potential to what I'm seeing, especially in the direction I think it's wonderfully realized. The mask in itself, I could see people saying, we've seen a lot of films, of course, that play around with horror masks. And at first it was kind of like, okay, let's see. I can tell, perhaps, again, smaller budget. That jawline, though, that was crazy. Hey, it got me. I was kind of creeped out by it. And even that end shot, too, some people might be like, well, I've seen that one, or a type of shot like that before. I find it generally, creepy. And I like that, right? We want an effective horror release to some degree that is still very entertaining. And in atmosphere and in potential this project being competent, I'll keep an open door on it. Right now, a trailer, only go so far. Sometimes you watch the project and you're like, man, you have a trailer that's better than the movie, right? We all know that feeling. I don't know if that's going to be the case with CHATTERBOX, but I'm very curious. I liked this trailer, and I will definitely look for an opportunity to watch it more in full if I can, to at least experiment with it. I'm open. I think there's a lot of potential to what I'm seeing here from the filmmaker. Let me get this name attribution right. And the cast seems to be doing a good job generally as well. Ben Patterson, he's serving in director and writing roles. And he's actually got... He's done a lot. Looking at his filmography just in passing, he's done some... He's got a lot of production credits. And he's done some previous writing projects before, including this film and Wreck. That came out in 2020. Maybe I'll look at that one to engage with his work as well. I don't know. Maybe I'll cover that in the future. That one is, well, let me look at where that's being carried. That was a Freevee debut, I believe. Or at least you can watch it there. And on Tubi as well. I would imagine, if I'm just going on a preliminary thought here, that CHATTERBOX will have the same destination point. A lot of indie fare tends to go on Tubi. It's a free service with, consideration of ads. But there are sometimes great projects you can see on Tubi, to be fair. There are. I've seen quite a good variety. And with ITN, like I said, it's a general mix. Sometimes you don't know what to expect of a project when you first engage with it. Sometimes you might think it's wonderful. Other times you might be like, it may look cheap, or it might look lazy, or it might show its limitations. Not CHATTERBOX. I actually think what I'm seeing here is a really good pitch for a smaller horror fare film. I'm tempted to watch it. The trailer did its job. I'm curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below for those of you as well. I'm imagining this is probably going to be a first introduction for many of us, right? I don't know how widespread this film is getting in terms of circulation. And, I do like to give a hand up where I can to indie films. It's part of the reason I cover smaller type projects. I do believe there is reason to look at some of the smaller attributions and see perhaps the developing talent. So you look at people in the cinematic space in terms of more commercial or commercially viable names, and oftentimes people started from smaller works, right? Everybody had to start somewhere. And maybe for Ben Patterson, and maybe some of the actors as well involved in this project, some of the crew members as well that are producing, in my opinion, a very competent work, the future might be bright. And if I can have any influence in that as well to promote a movie that maybe it deserves higher recognition, as many indie films do, I'd love to be able to provide that if I can. And with Chatterbox, I got good feelings of what I'm seeing here. Good horror tone, genuinely creepy and original in some respects in its own way. Again, that moving jawline, that worked for me. That feels different in particular to maybe some of the other type masked villain horror movies that I've seen. There's a freshness here and a good management of certain film qualities that makes it feel like a very competent picture. So even amid perhaps a lower budget scale, and even the house choice in my opinion was great. Even amid clear traits, I watch this, I'm like, okay, I can see, how this is reined in particular to resource access. You're doing a good job of what you have available to you in producing a work that I find quite inviting, unnerving, and tempting as a watch. I'm generally curious, like I said, to engage with Chatterbox, and I hope the feeling for those of you out there that are perhaps fans of the horror atmosphere like myself, that you share a similar sentiment. I think Chatterbox, at least on a first inclination, deserves that point of access. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.